Whoa, where are they protesting at? This is all ahead of Kamala Harris's DNC, the Democratic Nomination Convention here in Chicago. Oh man, they're protesting. This is taking over the DNC. And take a look at some of these people who have jumped on Kamala Harris's DNC stage right before her rally or speech.
Are y'all gonna do better than that? Mike, the money! 150,000 people are dead! You are funding a genocide!
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
There's so many Trump supporters in my comments right now asking me dumb questions like this because they clearly don't understand how the economy works. Let me explain how it's perfectly feasible for Kamala to give everybody free money.
Kamala can wave her magic wand and build millions of new homes across America.
By the end of my first term, we will end America's housing shortage by building 3 million new homes and rentals that are affordable for the middle class. In addition, while we work on the housing shortage, my administration will provide first-time home buyers with $25,000 to help with the down payment on a new home.
Kamala spent $8 billion and she built 7 charging stations. You think she can build 3 million homes? The guy she's running against builds things for a living. If you want a new home, I'd vote for that guy. And she's going to hand anybody who wants to build their first house a check for $25,000. Do you hear that sound? If you listen closely, that's the sound of every home seller raising their listing price by 25 grand.
You unveiled some economic policies last week.
Yeah.
Can you explain how you're going to pay for those? And can you give us a sense of what other policies you want to unveil going forward?
Sure. Well, I mean, you just look at it in terms of what we are talking about, for example, around children.
If you'll look at this chart behind me, you'll see a weather map, and you can clearly see here that almost every day in the US it rains. Like all over the country it rains. Okay, and what do we know happens after it rains?
Rainbows.
One of these things pops up. Okay, what Kamala's planning to do is when the rainbow comes up, we're gonna have a task force of people go out to the end of the rainbow where they will find one of these. These kind gentlemen have been giving out pots of gold to us for generations, and what happens is the other politicians have known about this secret and they just take the gold for themselves, like they don't even share it. But what Kamala's planning to do is pump these pots of gold into the economy and back into the hands of the American people. And I commend her for that.
Brilliant.
So y'all need to get woke, okay? It's time to be unburdened by what has been.
Our country has come a long way since President Biden and I took office. Many Americans don't yet feel that progress in their daily lives. Costs are still too high. As president, I will take on the high costs that matter most to most Americans, like the cost of food. A loaf of bread costs 50% more today than it did before the pandemic. Ground beef is up almost 50%. I will work to pass the first ever federal ban on price gauging on food.
And if that didn't satisfy her communist cravings, Kamala is also proposing giving first-time home buyers up to 25 grand, aka your hard-earned money, so that they can buy a house.
While we work on the housing shortage, my administration will provide first-time home buyers with $25,000 to help with the down payment on a new home. We can do this. We can do this. All to help more Americans experience the pride of home ownership and the financial security that it represents and brings. So that's my plan. Together, we will build what I call an opportunity economy.
When it comes to food, another strain on family budgets, Harris vowed to impose a ban on what she called grocery price gouging. The average cost of a pound of ground beef has risen 44% since 2019.
That's supposed to be like one of the cheapest meats you get, and somehow it's gone up to.
The Harris campaign hasn't provided many details on how these plans would work or how much they would cost.
And that's the big question mark, folks. Vice President Kamala Harris has finally laid out her plans, and we have no clue as to how she's going to make them work. In other words, she's basically pandering to what the voters want to hear. But that's not what we need to hear. What we need to hear is how they're going to get from point A to point B. Her statements were so controversial that even left-leaning news outlets were besides themselves when she revealed them. And guys, if you haven't already, please take a second, hit the like button for the video. Thank you so much for sharing this video and for subscribing to the channel.
Princess Kamala wasn't supposed to have plans, or whatever those plans were. She was supposed to hide them until after the election. But now she wants to pick the price of bacon? Kamala knows what a head of lettuce should cost, even though she hasn't been in a grocery store in 4 years. The princess just waves her magic wand and poof, a loaf of bread's $2.50. Why didn't anyone else think of that? Well, a lot of people did. And it's been a disaster every time. 2,000 years ago, Roman Emperor Diocletian put in a price control, punishable by death. Prices went up, and merchants started selling goods on the black market. The Soviets tried it too. That ended in bread lines. Even President Nixon gave it a shot.
The time has come for decisive action. Action that will break the vicious circle of spiraling prices and costs. I am today ordering a freeze on all prices and wages throughout the United States for a period of 90 days.
Nixon's price freeze triggered shortages and even more inflation. And then 90 days later, he got rid of them. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez went on a socialist spending spree, which sent food prices skyrocketing. So he had the same idea as Harris and capped food prices. And Venezuela went from one of the richest countries in the world to one of the poorest. Price controls aren't a new idea. They're just a bad one.
It is a device that governments have repeatedly resorted to try to cover up the effects of their own policies. It is offered as a cure for inflation. It is not a cure for inflation. It has never been a cure for inflation. It is an alleged cure that is far worse than the disease.
The government setting food prices didn't work for Rome, the Soviets, Nixon, or Venezuela. But Kamala thinks she can just wave her magic wand and voila, capitalism disappears. This was her campaign's first opportunity to show us her economic vision, and it turns out she's blind as a bat. We all waited a month to hear what Kamala believed in, and she finally told us it's communism. After Kamala said she was going to choose the price of cheese, Bernie Sanders released a statement calling it a very important step forward, or backward. The princess doesn't understand basic math. She thinks supply and demand means when she demands something, the intern supplies it. Kamala's communism would have come out in a primary. And for those Democrats watching, a primary is when politicians compete with each other and do interviews, take questions from voters, and tell us what they believe in. But why bother with democracy when coronating a mysterious princess makes it easier on the Democrats and much easier for her?
And we haven't even talked about how she trashed her own policies as she acknowledged just how far costs have come. All of these costs going up happened under the Biden-Harris administration. And now we're just supposed to believe that voting for her as president is supposed to be like miraculously solving all these problems? Nobody's buying that. Now, one method that she's suggesting is that the federal government will be in charge of fixing the price of most commodities. Something that doesn't sound very American. Actually sounds quite socialist or even communistic. And guess what, guys? Even liberals are aware that this isn't the way for her to win the White House.
You know you've crossed the line when the liberal Washington Post calls you a commie. Check out this headline they wrote. It says, quote, "When your opponent calls you communist, maybe don't propose price controls." And even CNN's calling it a gimmick.
First of all, nobody can explain what price gouging means. You've seen this kind of thing tried in lots of other countries before: Venezuela, Argentina, the Soviet Union, etc. It leads to shortages. It leads to black markets. The specific way this bill is written might actually increase prices.
Reasonable people would ask, what does that mean? What does that really mean? And how is the government going to be involved in it? Is this just a ploy? Because it sounds kind of like it.
Besides that, analysts who believe that Harris doing this would actually work, they're getting called out on live TV, guys. So here's what Jessica Tarlov said about both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris when it comes to upbringing.
And you take the contrast of yesterday. So you had President Trump, someone who grew up a millionaire, became a billionaire, standing in front of his golf club, ranting and raving about everything, lying about everything from, GDP rates to poverty rates to energy production, et cetera. And then you have Kamala Harris, someone who's talking about her middle-class upbringing, the fact that her family rented throughout their lives, so she knows what it means for people out there who can't get on the property ladder, someone who worked at McDonald's through college. You couldn't have the starker juxtaposition between these two candidates. And then on top of it, she's saying to people, I feel your pain. I know how much things cost.
You heard that right, guys. She said that Donald Trump went from being a millionaire to a billionaire, admitting that he's a good businessman. And this is what Greg Gutfeld pounced on because it makes sense to have somebody like that in charge of the economy. Check out how Jessica Tarlov got exposed here.
First, I want to point out something Jessica said, that Trump began as a millionaire and now he's a billionaire. I think that makes him an expert in this. I would rather listen to somebody who began as a millionaire and is now a billionaire than somebody who doesn't have a damn clue about economics. I've never heard a candidate today more unsure of themselves on a topic than Kamala Harris. I think she's been burdened by the weight of expectations put on her by the media. I've never seen a better campaign ad for Trump. She's campaigning better for Trump than Trump is. First, let's talk about the down payment issue on the House. A lot of this stuff is infuriating, because they're treating the American public like idiots. She makes a proposal that is only half an equation. The first half is, here's a nice thing for you. The second half is missing, who pays for it? You saw this with student loan theft, described as forgiveness. Who paid for it? You paid for it. You see with immigration policy, who's footing the billions and all that free stuff? You're paying for it. Nothing is free. Nothing is free. And the sooner or later you figure that out, the better off you're going to be. And that's directed at Democrats who don't understand that these policies are going to sink this country. If you cap prices, you increase scarcity by diminishing competition. People can call her a communist, but you gotta explain this, because the media won't ask the follow-up questions. How do you plan on doing this? Please give me an example. Give me an example where industries got together in a room and decided to drastically increase prices. That doesn't exist. The only example they'll have is, a bodega raised prices on umbrellas when it rained. That's all they got. There is no payoff for industries to artificially inflate their prices, because the people who drive the prices are the consumers. That is, if you want to understand supply and demand, it's the consumers who drive the prices. There is absolutely no debate on this. There is not a single economist who would agree that this is the right thing to do.
Now, I would call that a mic drop moment for Gutfeld. And just to kind of really make the point clear, even CNN is worried about these policies, mainly because Kamala Harris is admitting that Bidenomics did not work at all.
Now that you've heard the speech, what stands out to you as the most clear and effective line of attack that we're likely going to hear from Republicans as a response?
Two things. I think number one, she took a lot of far left positions during her first run in 2019 and 2020. She has, temporarily kind of moderated these through some anonymous quotes from aides saying, well, she doesn't really want to ban fracking anymore. She doesn't want to do this, doesn't want to do that. This new program that she's kind of doing is pretty far left, $25,000, price controls essentially. That's number one. But the other thing is, kind of conveniently forgot she was vice president for the last 4 years when a lot of the housing market crisis was at its worst, when inflation was at its worst. So there's a lot of memory holding that.
Now that's one question that we need to ask her for sure, guys. You've been in office for some of the worst economic times of our country. Why in the world should we trust you with it for another 4 years? And this is for sure going to be a key conversation once Donald Trump and Kamala Harris heads off into their first debate. But what do you guys think about all this? Should we keep Bidenomics in play? And should we go with Kamala Harris and her proposed policies? Now, on that note, guys, I did a previous video that you guys got to check out. It shows us just where Kamala Harris's loyalty lies. Now, the bad news is that many people believe it's not with the American people. As always, I appreciate you guys being here. I'll see you on the next one.